The winter storm had started early in the day, but by late afternoon it had grown into something far more dangerous. The wind raced across the open plains with a wild strength that felt almost alive. Snow blew in circles, thick and heavy, making it hard to see even a short distance. Jacob Hale, a quiet cowboy who lived alone in a small cabin far from town, had been working outside when the storm started. He rushed to bring his tools in, cover the wood pile, and shut the barn doors tight. By the time he reached his porch, snow already covered his shoulders and hat. He pushed the cabin door closed behind him and listened to the storm howl like a warning. Jacob lived alone because he preferred the simple peace of the land. His cabin was small but warm, built strong with thick wooden walls. He set a pot of stew by the fire and added more wood, expecting a silent night. The storm worried him, but he told himself he had seen worse. He sat down with a cup of coffee, letting the warmth settle into his hands. He thought he would spend the night reading an old book and waiting for the storm to calm. Then, just as the sun disappeared behind the white sky, he heard a sound that froze him. It was faint, almost covered by the wind, but it was there. A knock on the door. At first he thought maybe something had blown against the wood, but then he heard it again. A slow, weak knock. Jacob stood up quickly, surprised. No traveler would be walking in weather like this. The closest town was miles away. He wondered if maybe a neighbor needed help, but his nearest neighbor lived nearly 2 hours by horseback. He walked to the door and pushed it open only a few inches at first, letting in a burst of icy wind. Outside stood a woman, half bent, her hair covered in snow, her skin pale from the cold. She looked like she had been walking for hours through the storm. Her clothes were torn, her hands shaking so badly she could barely keep them at her sides. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his, and Jacob saw fear, exhaustion, and deep pain inside them. She was Apache, her features unmistakable, and he immediately understood the courage it must have taken for her to come to a stranger's door. Before he could say anything, she tried to speak, but her voice cracked in her throat. She tried again, forcing out the words with effort. She said she had nowhere else to go, that she was freezing, and she understood if he turned her away. She lowered her gaze, trembling, and in a broken whisper told him she had nothing left to offer in return for warmth or safety. Her words were not bold. They were desperate. They came from someone who had suffered too much, someone who believed kindness was rare and maybe even impossible. Jacob felt something tighten in his chest. He saw the shame on her face, the way she tried not to meet his eyes, the way her hands shook not only from cold, but from fear of rejection. She honestly believed she had no reason to be welcomed inside except to survive the night. Jacob did not even think twice. He stepped back and opened the door wide. His voice was firm but gentle as he told her to come inside immediately. He didn't care who she was, where she came from, or what trouble she had faced. No human being should suffer outside in such cold. He guided her inside, shut the door against the wind, and moved her toward the fire. The warmth hit her slowly, almost painfully. She stood stiff at first, unsure if she truly belonged in the cabin, unsure if she was safe. Jacob grabbed a thick blanket and wrapped it carefully around her shoulders. She gasped softly when the warmth touched her frozen skin, and her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. She kept whispering apologies as if she thought she was causing trouble. Jacob shook his head and told her she needed to sit before she collapsed. She lowered herself onto a wooden chair near the fire, her legs trembling from exhaustion. Jacob poured her a cup of warm broth and placed it gently in her hands. She held it tightly, letting the heat soak into her fingers. After a long moment, she managed to speak her name. She said she was called Taya. Her voice was quiet, almost too soft to hear over the crackling fire. Jacob nodded and told her his name too, though he noticed she seemed too tired to respond. He asked her how long she had been out in the storm, and she swallowed hard before telling him her story. Taya and her family had been traveling on foot when the storm arrived earlier than expected. They had tried to find shelter, but the wind separated them. She became lost in the whiteout. She walked and walked, hoping to find a tree line, a rock wall, anything that could break the wind. But there was nothing. The world was only snow and wind until she saw a small cabin far in the distance. She said she almost turned away because she didn't know who lived inside. She had been taught to be careful, especially around strangers, but the cold had become unbearable. Her feet were numb, her hands stiff, and her breath so weak she thought she might collapse before reaching the door. She had knocked with the last of her strength, expecting nothing, expecting maybe even danger. But standing in that icy storm, she had no choice. Jacob listened quietly, his heart heavy. She had been brave, far braver than she knew. He admired her strength. He told her she was safe here, that the storm could not reach her inside these walls. He assured her she owed him nothing. His only wish was for her to survive the night. For a long time, Taya didn't say anything. She just looked into the fire, her eyes soft and tired. Jacob could see how much fear she had carried, how much struggle she had endured even before reaching his door. Her breathing slowly steadied. The warmth of the cabin seemed to loosen the tightness in her shoulders. Jacob kept the fire strong, occasionally adding more logs. He checked the windows and door to be sure the snow wouldn't push in. Every small action made Taya feel more at ease. She watched him move around the cabin, surprised by the calmness in his manner. She wasn't used to strangers showing kindness without wanting something in return. But Jacob didn't ask anything from her. He didn't make her feel uncomfortable. He simply helped, the way a good man should. Bit by bit, the storm outside grew louder, but the cabin remained warm and safe. Taya pulled the blanket closer around herself. She was still shaking slightly, but she was alive, and that was all that mattered now. Jacob sat nearby, not too close, giving her space, reading his book quietly so she wouldn't feel watched. She glanced at him from time to time, wondering why he had helped her, why he had opened the door without fear or hesitation. Jacob didn't know her thoughts, but he understood enough. He knew she needed rest, warmth, and a sense of safety before anything else. When he looked at her, he saw not a stranger, not someone from another culture, but a human life that needed saving. That was all he cared about. As the night continued, the storm outside raged with even more power, making the cabin shake slightly. Taya looked toward the door once, imagining what might have happened if she had arrived a few minutes later. Jacob noticed her worried look and gave her a reassuring nod. He said she was safe here and that the storm would pass eventually. For the first time since arriving, she let herself believe his words. Inside that small cabin, warmed by firelight and simple human kindness, the frozen woman who had lost hope found a second chance at life. And the cowboy who had expected a quiet evening found his world unexpectedly changed by a single knock on the door in the middle of a deadly winter storm. Taya sat close to the fire, wrapped tightly in the thick blanket Jacob had given her. The warmth felt strange at first. Her skin tingled painfully as the cold slowly left her body. She breathed in the scent of burning wood and warm broth, trying to calm the fear still sitting deep inside her. Jacob moved quietly around the cabin, making sure not to frighten her. He checked the stew, added more wood to the fire, and hung his wet coat near the stone hearth to dry. The storm outside kept roaring like a wild animal. But inside the cabin, everything felt steady and safe. Taya held the cup of broth with both hands. Her fingers were stiff, and her movements were slow, but the warmth of the drink helped bring life back into her. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," her voice still shaky. Jacob nodded gently, telling her she didn't need to thank him. She was freezing, and he would never leave anyone outside in a storm like this. His calm tone made her relax a little more, even though her heart still carried a mix of fear and exhaustion. For a long moment, she simply watched the fire. She listened to the crackling logs, the soft whistle of wind through the cracks in the walls, and Jacob's steady footsteps. She felt like she had stepped into another world, a warm corner of peace in the middle of a deadly winter. After a while, she gathered enough strength to speak again. She told Jacob she didn't understand why he helped her so quickly. Most settlers, she said quietly, did not trust her people. Jacob listened without interrupting. He didn't rush her. When she finished, he told her in a gentle voice that kindness didn't need to choose sides. A person in danger was simply a person in danger. Nothing else mattered to him. His words made her eyes soften. She was not used to such simple honesty. Life had shown her enough hardship to teach her caution, and she had learned early that trust could be dangerous. But Jacob's actions had been clear from the moment he opened the door. He hadn't asked questions. He hadn't hesitated. He had only cared that she was freezing. As the warmth finally began to feel normal, her body relaxed into the chair. She pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. Jacob noticed her shiver again and placed another log on the fire. The flames grew brighter, casting orange light across the cabin walls. Taya watched the movement of the flames, then slowly looked around the small room. It was simple but neat. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a bed to the left side, some tools hanging on the wall, and a shelf filled with books and small items Jacob had collected over the years. She asked him quietly if he lived alone, and he nodded. He explained that he liked the silence of the open land. It allowed him to work hard during the day and rest without disturbance at night. But he admitted the nights could be long and lonely. Taya understood that loneliness all too well. It was something she had felt often, especially during difficult seasons. Jacob sat down near the fire, not too close to make her uncomfortable, but near enough to talk. He stirred the stew slowly, letting the smell fill the room. He asked if she was warm enough, and she nodded. The kindness in his voice made her feel something she had not felt for days: safety. After some time, Taya found her voice steady enough to tell him more about her journey. Her family had been traveling to visit relatives when the storm surprised them. They had tried to move fast, hoping to find shelter in the forest ahead, but the snow had fallen too thick, too quickly. The wind had grown fierce and blinded them. She remembered calling out for them, trying to follow their voices, but the storm swallowed every sound. She had walked until her legs felt heavy and her breath came short. She feared that if she stopped walking, she would simply fall into the snow and never rise again. Hearing her story, Jacob felt a deep respect for her strength. She had faced the storm alone, fought through fear, and pushed her body far beyond its limits. He told her quietly that he admired her courage. Taya lowered her eyes shyly. She had never thought of herself as brave. She only knew she wanted to live, and she wanted to see her family again. Jacob served her a second cup of broth, but she hesitated before taking it. She didn't want to seem like a burden. Jacob smiled gently and told her to drink. Food and warmth were important after such a long struggle. She accepted it with trembling hands. The taste of warm broth felt like hope. The storm outside suddenly hit the cabin with a hard gust, making the wood creak. Taya flinched at the sound, her memories of wandering through the cold flashing back. Jacob noticed her reaction and spoke softly to reassure her. He said the cabin had stood strong for many years, through storms just as fierce. She was safe now. No snow or wind could break through these walls. His voice worked like a calming hand. Taya breathed slowly until her shoulders eased. She thanked him again, this time with more strength in her voice. Jacob said gently that he didn't need her thanks. Helping someone in danger was simply what he believed a person should do. That was the rule he lived by, and he had never questioned it. As the fire warmed her more deeply, Taya felt her mind clear. She realized that she was no longer cold, no longer lost. She was safe, and the cowboy sitting across from her was someone she could trust, even if she didn't know why her heart believed that so easily. Jacob asked her about her family, who she was traveling with, and where they might have gone. Taya explained that she had been with her mother and younger brother. They had been moving toward the river area, hoping to reach a sheltered valley before the storm worsened, but the heavy wind had pushed them apart. She prayed they had found some kind of cover. Her voice broke slightly when she spoke about her brother. Jacob listened with full attention, letting her speak at her own pace. He assured her that once the storm calmed, he would help her search for them. She stared at him in surprise. She had expected him to offer shelter, but not help beyond that. Traveling across snow-covered land was hard work, and most people would avoid it unless absolutely necessary. But Jacob simply said it as if it were the most natural thing to do, that he would not let her go out alone. Her gratitude showed in her eyes. For the first time in many days, she felt a quiet hope rising inside her. Jacob went to check the window, making sure the wooden shutters were locked. Taya watched him move with steady confidence. He was a man who understood storms, danger, and hard roads, and yet he carried himself with a gentle respect that made her feel calm. When he returned to the fire, Taya told him something she had not told anyone in a long time, that she often worried the world outside her people would never understand her, never accept her. Jacob listened with patient silence and then told her that the world was made of all kinds of people. Some chose fear, some chose anger, and some chose kindness. He believed kindness should guide every choice. That was how he lived. His simple words touched her more than he knew. She felt her breathing slow, her mind settling into a peaceful quiet she had been missing for a long time. The firelight warmed her face. The danger outside faded for a moment, replaced by the comfort of a safe cabin and the steady presence of a man who showed her humanity without expecting anything in return. As the night deepened, the storm kept roaring, but inside the cabin, a fragile bond began to form, built on trust, survival, and the shared understanding that every human life carried value. Taya, once frozen and afraid, now began to feel her strength return. And Jacob, who had expected nothing more than a lonely evening, now realized that sometimes a single knock at the door could change the entire course of a night, and maybe even more. The storm outside continued its wild cry deep into the night, shaking the cabin walls every now and then. But the fire inside burned strong, giving the room a warm glow that softened the fear Taya had carried for hours. She sat wrapped tightly in the blanket Jacob had given her, and though exhaustion still weighed heavily on her, the warmth and safety slowly loosened the knot of worry inside her chest. Jacob sat across from her, carving a small piece of wood with quiet focus. He didn't speak unless she spoke first. He didn't push her for more answers. He simply created a gentle space where she could rest, breathe, and feel human again. The soft sound of his knife against the wood and the crackling of the fire made the cabin feel calm, like a world far away from the storm that had nearly taken her life. After a long silence, Taya finally whispered that the warmth felt strange. She didn't mean it in a bad way, only that her body had been cold for so long that she wasn't used to feeling safe. Jacob smiled softly without looking up from his carving. He told her it was normal. After facing danger, the body needed time to understand it was no longer in harm's way. His words were simple, but they reached her deeply. She asked him what he was carving. Jacob lifted the wood, brushing off the shavings with his thumb. It was shaping into a small bird. Taya's tired eyes brightened with curiosity. He explained that on long nights, carving helped him keep his hands busy and his mind settled. He often carved small animals, birds, horses, sometimes even simple shapes, and left them for children in town when he made supply trips. He didn't say it as if it were anything special, but Taya saw how much kindness was hidden in that small detail of his life. She stared at the carved bird for a long moment. It reminded her of the wooden figures her grandfather used to make before he passed away. That memory warmed her heart in a way she didn't expect. Her voice softened when she told Jacob about her grandfather, how he used to carve little animals for her and her brother, how they would sit together under a tree during warm seasons and listen to stories about strength and courage. Jacob listened with full attention. He didn't interrupt or rush her. He watched her eyes shine with a mixture of sadness and warmth as she remembered her family. He noticed how careful she was with every word, as if she was slowly letting pieces of herself come back to life after being suffocated by the storm. The firelight flickered across her face, showing how exhaustion and strength lived side by side inside her. When she finished speaking, Jacob nodded slowly and told her that her grandfather sounded like a wise man. She smiled faintly, the expression soft but genuine. It was the first true smile he had seen from her. For the next few minutes, they simply listened to the storm. The wind slammed against the cabin again and again, but each time it happened, Jacob spoke softly, reminding her the cabin was strong, built to survive many winters. She believed him. His confidence was steady, like the flame of the fire refusing to go out. Eventually, Taya shifted slightly in her chair. She looked around the cabin with more alert eyes now that she was no longer frozen and weak. She noticed a small shelf near the wall filled with books. Some were old and worn at the edges. She asked him quietly if he liked reading. Jacob chuckled softly and admitted he wasn't the best reader in the world, but during quiet nights, the stories helped him feel less alone. Taya found herself wanting to know more about him. She asked how long he had lived in this cabin. Jacob leaned back in his chair and explained that he had built it himself a few years earlier, after deciding he needed a life away from crowded towns and loud saloons. He liked the sound of the wind, the peace of the open land, and the feel of the soil beneath his boots. Hard work didn't scare him. Loneliness did sometimes, but he had learned to live with it. Taya understood that kind of loneliness well. She had felt it many times, even surrounded by her own people. She told him that life in her band had been simple, but not always easy. They worked together, traveled together, and faced hardships together. Yet there were moments when she felt invisible, like another face in a long line of responsibilities. But she loved her family dearly. They were the center of her world. Jacob could hear the longing in her voice. He could hear the worry, too. The fear she carried for her mother and young brother who were still lost somewhere in the storm. He assured her once again that when the storm settled, he would help her search for them. She looked at him with surprise, gratitude shining in her eyes. She whispered that she didn't understand why he cared so much. Jacob looked gently into her tired face and told her that caring for others didn't need a reason. Her throat tightened. She had never heard words like that spoken with such honesty. As the night deepened, Jacob prepared a small bedroll near the fire for her. He didn't ask her to move. He simply laid out the blankets and used a pillow that looked like it had been with him for years. He told her she could sleep here where it was warmest. Taya hesitated. She wasn't used to accepting help so freely, but the exhaustion in her bones was too strong. She didn't protest. She lay down carefully, still wrapped in the blanket. Jacob added another log to the fire and sat in his chair, carving quietly again. He didn't leave her alone. His presence made her feel safe enough to close her eyes. The glow of the fire painted soft shadows on the walls. She could hear Jacob's gentle carving, the steady rhythm comforting her like a heartbeat. For a long while she didn't sleep. Her mind wandered through memories and fears, her mother calling her name, her brother's small hand slipping from hers in the snow, the endless white blindness of the storm. She blinked away tears she didn't want to show. She had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of strangers could be dangerous. But Jacob was not like the strangers she feared. His kindness had no weight, no pressure, no hidden expectations. She lifted her head slightly and looked at him. He met her eyes with a calm expression that told her she didn't need to hide anything from him. She lay back down and breathed quietly until sleep finally pulled her into its arms. Jacob watched her for a moment, making sure she was truly resting. He could tell she had been carrying heavy worry for a long time. He felt a quiet respect for her strength, for the way she had survived the storm despite the odds. He whispered softly, though she could not hear him, that she had nothing to fear tonight. Hours passed slowly. The fire burned low, then bright again as Jacob added logs. The storm outside softened just a little, as if tired from its own fury. Jacob kept guard over Taya's rest, listening to the wind and wondering how far her family might have wandered. He hoped they were alive, and he hoped morning would bring a chance to search for them. As the night stretched on, two strangers who had begun the day on completely different paths now shared the same small space, one sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, the other keeping watch, not because he had to, but because something in his heart told him it was the right thing to do. And in that quiet cabin, warmed by firelight and guarded by a cowboy who believed in simple kindness, Taya's life began to move toward hope again. Morning arrived slowly, with a pale gray light touching the edges of the cabin windows. The storm had finally weakened, though gentle snow was still falling outside. The wind, once a wild roar, now whispered softly across the land. Jacob rose before dawn as he usually did, moving quietly so he wouldn't disturb Taya, who was still sleeping near the fire. She looked peaceful for the first time since he found her. Her breathing was even, and her face no longer carried the tightness of fear. The warmth of the cabin and the long night of rest had helped her greatly. Jacob added more wood to the fire, careful not to make too much noise. He put on his heavy coat, gloves, and boots, and stepped outside for a moment. The cold morning air hit his face sharply, reminding him that winter was still in full force. But the world was calm now. Snow covered everything like a thick white blanket, and fresh tracks had already been erased by the night's snowfall. He looked across the plains and whispered a small hope that Taya's family was somewhere safe. Inside the cabin, Taya stirred as the fire crackled. Slowly she opened her eyes. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the warm orange glow on the ceiling and remembered everything. The storm, Jacob's kindness, the long night she had survived. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her, and looked toward the door. Jacob came back inside just then, brushing snow off his shoulders. When he saw her awake, he smiled gently. He asked her how she felt, and she answered softly that she felt stronger than yesterday. A small wave of relief went through Jacob. He told her the storm had calmed, and that today would be a good day to begin searching for her family. She nodded, though worry immediately filled her eyes. She didn't know where her mother and brother had gone, or if they had found shelter, but she held on to hope. She believed they were strong, and that they would fight to survive. Jacob warmed some breakfast, simple bread and hot tea, and handed her a cup. She accepted it gratefully, the steam rising like a comfort she never thought she would feel again. After they ate, Jacob began preparing for the search. He saddled his horse, tied extra blankets to the saddle, packed food, water, and a small medical kit in case they found someone hurt. Taya watched him carefully, touched by how much effort he put into helping her. She wrapped herself in the warm clothing Jacob found for her, thick gloves, a heavy coat, and strong boots he said belonged to a friend who had stayed with him once. Taya touched the coat gently, surprised by how kind the cowboy continued to be without asking for anything in return. She thanked him again, and he simply nodded, as if helping her was the most natural thing in the world. When they stepped outside together, the cold air rushed toward them, but it didn't feel as deadly as yesterday. The sky was brighter, and the land stretched out before them in silence. Jacob helped Taya onto the horse, then climbed up behind her. He told her to hold the saddle to keep steady, and she did. Her heart beat fast, partly from fear, partly from the unknown journey ahead. They started riding across the snowy plains. The horse moved carefully, its hooves sinking deep into the snow. Taya looked around, trying to remember the direction she had come from the day before. The land was different now. Everything was white, and tracks had been erased. But she pointed toward the distant tree line. She believed her family might have tried to reach that area for shelter. Jacob trusted her instinct and guided the horse in that direction. As they moved across the snow, Jacob kept checking the land for signs. Broken branches, footprints, smoke. Anything that could help. Taya scanned the plains too, her eyes sharp with worry. She called out her mother's name once, then her brother's, hoping the wind might carry her voice. But the plains remained quiet. They rode for an hour, then another. At times, Jacob slowed the horse and climbed down to study the snow. Once, he found a faint trail, shallow footprints that had almost disappeared. They followed it carefully, praying it would lead somewhere. Taya's heart beat faster. She whispered that the tracks looked like the size of her brother's feet. Jacob hoped she was right. As they followed the trail, the forest edge came into view. It was a small grouping of trees, but they were thick enough to offer some protection from the storm. Jacob guided the horse toward it. Soon, both he and Taya smelled something faint in the air, smoke. Taya gasped softly, hope lighting her face. Jacob urged the horse forward, and after a few moments, they saw it, a small, struggling fire near a cluster of rocks. Taya's breath caught in her throat. Near the fire, wrapped in blankets and sitting close together, were her mother and her younger brother. Her mother's head lifted slowly when she heard the horse approaching. When she recognized Taya, she cried out her name, her voice breaking with relief. Taya nearly collapsed with emotion. She slid off the horse as soon as it stopped and ran toward them, falling to her knees beside her mother. Her brother, weak but alive, wrapped his arms around her tightly. Her mother held her face in her hands, touching her as if making sure she was real. Tears mixed with laughter, relief, and gratitude. Jacob watched quietly for a moment, giving them space. He felt warmth in his chest, seeing the family reunited after such fear and separation. After the emotional moment passed, Jacob helped them adjust the fire, gave them food, and offered warm water. They were exhausted, but they were safe. Taya's mother looked at Jacob with deep gratitude in her eyes. She told him she had prayed someone kind would find Taya, someone who would not turn her away in the storm. Her voice shook as she thanked him again and again, but Jacob simply told her that he did what anyone with a heart should do. Taya's mother reached out and took his hand gently, a gesture filled with respect. She whispered that few men showed kindness to her people, but he had shown more than kindness. He had shown humanity. Jacob felt humbled. He had never helped people for praise. He helped because it was the right thing. Taya looked at Jacob with a soft expression he had not seen before. Her eyes carried gratitude, respect, and something more, something quiet and deep. She knew her family was alive because of him. She knew she too had survived because of his kindness. She stood beside him quietly, watching her mother and brother rest, feeling a peace she had not felt since the storm began. Jacob helped them pack their small camp and placed Taya's brother in front of him on the horse so he wouldn't have to walk through the deep snow. Taya and her mother walked beside the horse, supported by Jacob's steady pace. The journey back to the cabin felt easier. Hope followed them like a warm light. When they reached the cabin again, Jacob helped them inside, warmed more food, and prepared places for them to rest. Taya watched him move around the cabin with steady hands and a gentle manner. She realized something important then. Jacob had saved not just her life, but the lives of her family too. As night began to fall, the fear of the storm no longer controlled their hearts. Taya looked at Jacob with deep appreciation. She felt stronger now, not just in body, but in spirit. Jacob had kept his promise. He had given her hope when she thought all was lost, and as she watched him stoke the fire to keep everyone warm, she understood that kindness like his was rare. He didn't see different people, different worlds, or different cultures. He simply saw humans, and he protected them, one life at a time. The cabin grew warm again that evening, though the air outside was icy and sharp. Jacob kept the fire alive, adding wood slowly so the flames would last through the night. Taya's mother and brother slept deeply on the blankets he had set out for them. They were exhausted from the storm, from fear, and from wandering for hours with almost no rest. Their faces were peaceful now, softened by the safety around them. Taya sat near the fire, watching the flames reflect gently across her brother's small face. She felt relief so deep it almost made her weak. The day before, she had believed she might never see her family again. But now they were here, breathing softly, alive, warm, and safe. The feeling was overwhelming. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Jacob sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, his hat set beside him. He noticed the tired look in her eyes, but also the calm that had replaced her fear. She looked more grounded now, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from her heart. He told her softly that her brother seemed strong, and that her mother would recover with rest and warm food. Taya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. She said she didn't know how to thank him, not in any way that truly matched what he had done. Jacob shook his head gently and said he didn't do any of it for thanks. He did it because it was right. He said no one should suffer alone in the snow, no matter who they were. Taya looked down at her hands, touched by his honesty. She had met many people in her life, but kindness like Jacob's felt rare, almost like something from an old story her grandfather would tell. She remembered how she had knocked on his door thinking she had nothing left, no hope, no strength. She remembered believing he might turn her away. But he had opened the door fully, without hesitation, his face calm and his voice warm. She could not forget that moment. Jacob offered her a cup of warm tea, and she accepted it gratefully. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was gentle, like a shared understanding. They both looked at the fire, thinking about everything the last 2 days had brought. Life had changed suddenly, sweeping them into a storm neither had expected. Yet here they were, safe inside a cabin that had become a shelter not just from the cold, but from fear. After a while, Taya's mother woke up slowly and looked around with confusion before remembering where she was. She sat up with effort, and Jacob moved to help her, offering her water and a bowl of warm stew. She accepted it with shaking hands. Her eyes softened with gratitude each time she looked at him. She spoke in her native language to Taya for a moment, then turned to Jacob and said in slow English that his kindness had saved not just 1 life, but 3. Jacob listened with humility. He didn't know what to say to such deep gratitude. He only replied that he was glad they were safe. Taya's mother watched him with a thoughtful, gentle expression, as if trying to understand what kind of man would show such care to people he didn't know. She told him that hearts like his were rare, and that she would remember this day for the rest of her life. Later, when her brother woke up, he stared at Jacob with shy curiosity. Jacob smiled warmly and handed him one of the small wooden figures he had carved, a little bird with smooth edges. The boy held it tightly, his eyes lighting up with delight. He whispered something to Taya in their language, and she told Jacob that her brother said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever held. Jacob chuckled softly and told the boy he could keep it. The child's face brightened even more. The simple moment warmed the room in a way even the fire couldn't match. By afternoon, the storm clouds had cleared completely, revealing a bright winter sky stretched across the plains. Soft sunlight bounced off the snow, making the world shine. Taya and her family stepped outside with Jacob to breathe in the cold, fresh air. The land was quiet and peaceful now, as if it had forgotten the storm ever existed. The sky looked endless. Taya's mother approached Jacob and thanked him again with a respectful bow of her head. She said it was time for them to return to their people. They had relatives waiting in a camp not too far away. She wished she could repay him in some way, but Jacob told her that seeing them safe was more than enough. Taya watched her mother and brother prepare to leave, but her steps were slow. She wasn't quite ready. She stood beside Jacob, looking at the horizon, then down at the snow. She said softly that she still didn't understand why he helped them so much. Jacob looked at her with a patient expression and told her that helping others was part of who he was. He didn't think about the cost or the difference between people. He only saw those in need. His simple words touched her deeply. She felt something shift inside her, something warm and unfamiliar. She looked at him with soft eyes, seeing not just the cowboy who had helped her survive the storm, but the man behind the actions, a man with a steady, kind heart. As her family began their walk across the snow, Taya took a step toward them, then paused. Something held her back for just a moment. She turned to Jacob and said thank you again, but this time her voice was stronger, filled with emotion she could no longer hide. She told him he had given her something she thought she had lost forever: trust. Jacob felt her words settle in his chest in a way he didn't expect. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture filled with the respect he felt. He told her she was strong, stronger than she believed, and that she and her family deserved peace after such hardship. Taya took a slow breath and reached out her hand, placing it gently over her heart. It was a gesture of deep respect in her culture, reserved for people who had shown true goodness. Jacob understood the meaning even before she explained it. He nodded quietly, honored by the gesture. Finally, Taya turned and began walking beside her mother and brother. Every few steps, she looked back at Jacob, as if she couldn't quite leave without memorizing the sight of him standing there, tall, steady, and surrounded by the quiet glow of his cabin. Jacob watched them until they disappeared beyond the curve of the land. He stood still for a long time, listening to the soft wind and feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. His cabin felt different now, not because of anything he had changed, but because of the memory it now carried. A memory of courage, trust, and the unexpected bond formed in the heart of a storm. Inside the cabin, the fire burned softly, as if keeping the warmth of their presence alive just a little longer. Jacob walked back inside, set his hat on the table, and let out a slow breath. His life would go back to its quiet rhythm, but he knew he would never forget the day a frozen Apache woman knocked on his door with nothing but hope left, and how letting her in had changed more than just one night. And far across the snowy land, Taya walked with her family, holding her brother's hand and carrying a new strength in her heart. She told them softly that she had met a man who saw her not as a stranger, but as a human being worth saving. She said she would never forget him. Their paths had crossed for only a short time, but the storm had woven their stories together forever.